Hi, folks. We are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I am Dr. Erin.
And you are exceptionally welcome to our YouTube channel. We are two social scientists with PhDs who are obsessed with talking about culture, both popped and lived, through the lens of curiosity and empathy. We feel at Abbey Research that no one really knows how to do human. We're all kind of figuring it out together. And one of the ways that we figure it out is by analyzing and talking about culture through these very specific lenses. You'll find analysis on this channel of everything from gender dynamics in The Handmaid's Tale to what Hallmark Christmas movies can teach us about joy, to the legacy of colonization in places around the world. We have these conversations with each other all the time. We can show you the WhatsApp receipts. And we turned the cameras and recording devices on for you because we love the conversation with you as well. Please do not hesitate to comment, like, subscribe so that we can continue the conversation.
This video is a part of our ongoing 2021 trip around the world on our Colonizers World Tour. Every month we're picking a different theme or a different set of colonies. And exploring what culture and colonization looks like in those places. And for the month of June, we are doing a Colonizers World Tour Pride Edition. Oh, cute rainbow flag. And for our final week, we are in Puerto Rico, which is where we've landed, which was both a Spanish colony and technically still a United States territory colony. And yesterday we had our Puerto Rico 101 video, and today our piece of art we are covering is the 2015 documentary Mala Mala, which means bad in Spanish, but in the trans drag community kind of means like fierce. So we loved that. It was for rent on Prime Video. And it was worth every damn penny, y'all. We loved it. It is the story of, I believe, 9 featured humans who are members of the trans, either transgender or also transsexual, we'll explain, community in Puerto Rico. And it profiles...
Or the drag community.
Or the drag community, that's true.
It's something about all 9 of them. The thing they have in common is they're all either playing with gender,
yes,
or explicitly choosing to live a different gender than they were assigned sex at birth.
Yes, you're right, because there are several drag performers that are not trans folks. So we follow them, and we get a lot of individual profiles of these humans, which was a beautifully done way to show that, you know, a lot of things that we've learned. But we follow these folks for an hour and a half. We loved this documentary. We cannot recommend it enough. And we've just got a couple of kind of big picture issues that we want to make sure we highlight as we review and discuss. Dr. Kristen, hit me.
Oh my gosh, one of the things I loved the most was that they contradicted each other, because humans do, but so often documentaries, because they're pieces of art, want to tell you this cohesive narrative. And so like when we read reviews, you get some of the reviews that are like, oh, well, they left out this part or this wasn't. And I didn't read any reviews like that for this documentary, because what it was here is the wide range of folks who fall somewhere in this gender play category. We had somebody who even rejected both transgender and transsexual and only identifies it with gender dysphoria. Like, it's really, really wide. And it was both a lot of their emotional journeys, but also some factual stuff, like you cannot get testosterone hormones in Puerto Rico, which I was not aware of.
Right.
But you can get estrogen hormones in Puerto Rico. So we can have a lot of conversations about what that could mean, and we're going to keep doing research. This brought up a lot of conversations. But I loved that it was, you know, this to, like, somebody would say to, like, this is exactly what X means, and then about 3 vignettes later somebody else would say this is exactly what X means, and they were different things. And the documentary didn't edit any of those contradictions out.
Yeah, and I think there's a fascinating conversation, I was just scrolling in my notes to find it, between Ivana, who's a trans woman and also like very public trans activist in
I think
Puerto
like
Rico.
almost a Laverne Cox figure, like the same.
I would say so. Yeah, she's very well known. She does a lot of public advocacy.
And also her very, very traditionally feminine presenting in terms of an attractive female body.
Yes, and she talked about that, and that part was separate and fascinating about how she wanted her body to look, and she went to Ecuador to get the surgeries and all this kind of stuff. But she has a discussion with Soroya, who's this older woman who does not identify as transgender or transsexual and talks only about gender dysphoria. And they like just to have the two of them sit there hammers home. I mean, one of the points we always make when we're talking about any category of human, but we've been making it a lot during Pride Month, is that like no group is a monolith.
None.
And we have to, you know, do our best to understand how people define themselves and what words mean, because as this documentary also points out, like language is very important and you get to make who you are through language. So we have to respect people's decisions to self-categorize and self-identify. While also understanding that, you know, we can only ever apply that definition to that person, because you could meet 10 other people and they might have 10 other different understandings of who they are and how they go through the world and who they love and all that stuff. So any opportunity to hammer home that no group is a monolith. We spent a long time in Northern Ireland dealing with the troublesome categorizations of Catholic and Protestant and what that was defined as and what it is. So I thought that's what it did such a brilliant job with those contradictions, was just like, these are humans. These are humans trying to figure out life and who they are and trying to get recognition and equal status and fair treatment like humans deserve. And here's their lives. It was great.
And the other kind of adjacent to this is that there's not another documentary I've ever watched that juxtaposes trans life and drag life the exact same way, and kind of says, I was really reminded of the Netflix show Glow Up. And in one of the first season, one of the makeup artists who was competing said that makeup taught him he wasn't trans. Because he wasn't sure. And I kept flashing back to that individual in the conversations around drag in this, and is drag the is it a separate persona? Is it the personification of who you would be if you were your true female self? Is it somewhere in between? And then you have, is Sonia bringing up the idea that no one who chooses a trans body makes themselves look like a lot of women look, like they're all still in her perspective, they choose Barbie doll.
Yeah.
They choose perfection. So what happens when that body isn't tenable anymore? And the physicality of what it means to be a woman was a huge part of this documentary.
Yeah.
We should also say there was only two, and correct me if I'm wrong, one trans masculine story.
No, like Pax was the only one.
Yeah, Pax was the only one. And I have a lot more questions for poor Pax and his girlfriend.
It was so sad.
It was gut wrenching. Why can't you get testosterone?
And like, I just want to crowdfund. I just want to go fund to get him top surgery. Like,
I know.
Yeah.
So it was a very female heavy documentary.
Yes, but we had a couple people that weren't trans identifying, that were drag performers.
Yes.
And Alberic is one of the most interesting contradictions, and like you kind of get to see how he worked through why he wanted to be a drag performer and realized
then stop doing drag to become a corporate lawyer.
I love it. Following his true passion, practicing law. Go, Alberic, go. But he talks about how he went so far into his drag persona that he got like physically altering surgeries to make himself look more feminine, and then kind of got pulled back from that and pulled himself back and was like, no, that's not exactly what I want to do. You know, that's not what I get out of drag. I'm not trying to become someone else. And it is fat. Like, I want like 18 hours with these folks of documentary footage. But that was a really big thing for me that I've not, you've encountered drag performances a lot more than I have, but I hadn't seen any documentary kind of go into that correlation, that relationship between, and like that drag for so many of them was like the people that identified as trans, that it was the safe place where they could play with their gender and figure out how, and like I think there was a lot of people with S names in this, which was confusing. Sophia, who was the American born
Yes.
Trans woman, and she did drag, but she's like, I just want to be able to go to the grocery store. Like, I just want to blend in. I don't want to be noticed. I don't want to be a drag queen in real life, but like being a drag queen is the only way that I am accepted for how I want to look. Because when I go out in public during like, what, I forget, at one point she just said she just wanted to be like, to go out in the daylight or something, like to feel comfortable going out in the daylight. And I was like, oh.
It's such a visceral and yet gentle reminder that the way that we as humans perceive other humans has more power to those other humans than we think it does.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all that stuff we tell teenagers all the time. No one is thinking about you as much as you are thinking about you. And that is true. But the visceral reaction of what someone looks like is also very, very real. And for example, I can't tell you the number of times in my life that I've been somewhere, and myself included when I was younger, people are trying to figure out what is that person? Like, oh, look over there. What do you think they are?
Yeah.
And why do we care? Like, Jess Baker talks about this in her book around body neutrality and body positivity, and essentially says that like if fat folks don't want to get judged for their bodies, we got to stop judging other people for their clothes or their hairstyle or how they express their gender. Like, it's all a package.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we define gender in the West, which we talked about a little bit yesterday in our Good Doctors Diagnose, around how the gender binary works. So if you didn't get a chance to catch that, make sure you go back and do that, is so staunch that it controls the lives of people it does not need to control.
Yeah. And I think the other point, the other aspect of life, but specifically trans life for a lot of men and women that this documentary deals with very honestly is sex work. And I can count on, I run out of fingers to count how many times in the last month I've heard a trans person say that sex work was the only option they felt they had. It was sex work or homelessness. It was sex work or, starvation, especially at varying times in varying societies. But what I wanted to say and just have a moment of vulnerability was that this documentary kind of forced me to see that I had, rather understandably, some culturally internalized negative perceptions of sex work. And I was having this conversation with my mom the other day, and like, we're both liberal folks accepting, yeah, sure, we love people, we try not to judge, all of these things. But I was sitting there having emotional reactions to discussions of the sex work and what was happening in the video. And I was like, why am I feeling this way? What is this feeling? And so it forced me to kind of reflect on where those thoughts and feelings came from. And the conclusion I got to, rather obviously, is that we have a lot of cultural messages, especially in the United States, but a lot of places, about the negativity of sex work. We make a moral judgment on it a lot, especially in American culture. And, that's the power of cultural messages, which is, I think, another important thing always for us to be talking about is like, I would have never thought that I was a person who made judgments about sex workers. If you had asked me, I'd be like, no, I know, like, we need to protect them. It needs to be legalized. Like, I would have said all of those things, but that doesn't mean I didn't internalize every message I saw when I was younger. And I was like thinking about how many times I watched Pretty Woman when I was a kid and thought it was romantic that he saved her from sex work. And you know, as we were talking offline before we started filming, like, some people, it is a very dangerous and unhealthy situation for them.
For any variety of reasons.
For any number of reasons. No sex worker is the same. No circumstance is the same. But yeah, I think for me, that was one of the things that kind of surprised me, but was good. It's good to be confronted with those, because the internalized prejudices are the hardest ones to combat, because sometimes we don't even know they're there.
Yeah, internalized misogyny is a hell of a drug.
Like, it's a hell of a drug.
It's a hell of a drug.
Yeah, man. So,
well, I'm glad that you were able to process those feelings. I mean, this is one of the reasons we do what we do, so you can process those feelings in a neutral space where you didn't potentially inflict harm on somebody else unintentionally.
Yeah.
And I hope that everyone watching can kind of take a lesson from that this is the reason to push yourself out of your artistic comfort zone and sit with some stories that you've never really lived before, so you can double check those kind of things before you head out into the world.
Yeah, and I think, like, that's why I wanted to bring it up on this video. I didn't necessarily have to, but I think it is a good lesson and possibly a good example of how you can have conversations about it and how you can talk about it in a way that is received well and that is open and honest. And yeah. So you're welcome, everybody. We hope you like that example. But I was just looking at my notes. We have to talk about, before we finish, the transgender, transsexual shtick in Puerto Rico, because boy, was that something I was not familiar with.
And we're having trouble finding explanations and unpackings of this outside of this documentary. So if you are Puerto Rican and have connections to the trans community, or if the trans community you are in also does this bifurcation, please let us know. So our understanding, because both terms are used to the extent that at one point somebody even says it is the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and transsexual community, which I've never in my life heard before.
No, me neither.
What is taught in the States, and I've had trans friends of mine tell me never use the word transsexual. That's now offensive and we don't use that anymore. But then I've got trans folks using it for themselves on the screen. So what we can discern at this point is that transgender is the umbrella. It's the biggest one. Transsexual is somebody who then chooses to use medical intervention to more align their body with their identified gender.
Yeah.
But we can't really tell. So we're going to dig into this further, folks, but this is the first time we've encountered this bifurcation.
Yeah, and it took us both unprepared. We were unprepared for this discussion, but certainly you get humans in this documentary who identify as transgender or transsexual or neither or both. And so we're adding that term to our list to learn more about and to understand particularly why, you know, it could be Caribbean islands. It could be like influence from language. We don't know why it's so heavily used in Puerto Rico. So if anybody has any help with that, we're going to keep digging and we'll update our Google Doc if we find stuff. But if anybody else has any helpful hints out there or resources, we'd appreciate it.
For sure. Because it could just be something simple as people using different words, but we don't ever believe that there is anything actually that simple. So we'd love to dig in and find some of the more cultural stuff. But I think that covers what we want to say about Mala Mala.
That's us for Mala Mala. That's us for chapter 4 of A Colonizer's World Tour, looking at global queer life. The month of July will find us in chapter 5, looking at Portuguese colonies, which is they're not often talked about as a colonizer, but boy, were they. And we're going to start with the biggest Portuguese colony of all, Brazil.
So we'll see you guys next week for conversations about, I'm sure, football and Carnival. Bye.